The wagon wheel cracked against a rock hidden beneath the dusty trail, and Sarah Sullivan felt her stomach drop as the entire right side of her belongings lurched toward the Arizona ground, sending her precious few possessions tumbling into the sagebrush outside Ash Fork in the autumn of 1878. She sat there on the driver's bench, reins slack in her trembling hands, staring at the broken wheel and wondering how many more disasters God planned to rain down upon her before this terrible year finally ended. First her father's death from pneumonia back in Missouri, then the grueling journey west with a wagon train full of strangers, and now this, just 5 miles from the town where she'd hoped to start fresh as a schoolteacher. The position had been promised to her through correspondence, a lifeline thrown across the miles when she'd had nothing left but grief and determination. The desert stretched out around her in every direction, beautiful and merciless under the late afternoon sun. She'd sent the wagon train ahead that morning, insisting she could manage the final stretch alone with her single horse and light wagon. Pride, her father would have called it. Foolishness, she called it now. Sarah climbed down carefully, her boots sinking into the red dirt as she surveyed the damage. The wheel was beyond her ability to repair, that much was certain. She'd have to unhitch Molly, her mare, and ride into town for help, then come back for her belongings. Assuming no one robbed her blind in the meantime, assuming the coyotes didn't tear through her carefully packed trunk, assuming she didn't die of embarrassment first, she was reaching for Molly's harness when she heard hoofbeats approaching from the north. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her father's old pistol at her waist. A woman alone on the trail had to be cautious. But when the rider came into view, something about his easy posture in the saddle and the way he raised his hand in greeting made her relax slightly. He was tall even sitting on horseback, with dark hair that touched his collar and a face weathered by sun and wind. He wore a rancher's practical clothing, not a gunslinger's flashy getup, and his horse was a beautiful chestnut gelding that looked well cared for. As he drew closer, she could see his eyes were a startling gray, the color of storm clouds over the mountains. "Looks like you've got yourself some trouble, miss," he said, dismounting with practiced grace. His voice was deep and warm, touched with concern rather than the condescension she might have expected. "Just a broken wheel," Sarah replied, lifting her chin. "I can manage. I was about to ride into town for a wheelwright." He walked around her wagon, examining it with the careful attention of someone who knew his way around such problems. "That wheel's not just broken, it's split clean through. You hit something pretty hard. A rock. I didn't see it in time." She felt heat rise to her cheeks, frustrated by her own admission of carelessness. These trails can be tricky, full of surprises. He straightened up and extended his hand. "Marcus Cooper, I've got a ranch about 2 miles west of here." She took his hand, noting the calluses that spoke of hard work and the gentleness of his grip. "Sarah Sullivan. I'm meant to be the new schoolteacher in Ash Fork, assuming I can get there before they give my position to someone else." "Sarah Sullivan," he repeated, as if testing how her name felt in his mouth. "Miss Sullivan, I've got a better wagon at my ranch and tools to fix this wheel properly. If you'll allow me, I can take you there, we can transfer your belongings, and I'll have you in Ash Fork before supper time. The school board won't even know you were delayed." Sarah hesitated. Her father had warned her about trusting strangers, especially men in wild country where law was still finding its footing. But something about Marcus Cooper's straightforward manner and the honest concern in those gray eyes made her decision easier than it should have been. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Cooper. I accept. Marcus, please. And it's nothing more than what any decent neighbor would do." He moved to help her unhitch Molly. "You traveling alone from Missouri? You can tell I'm from Missouri," Your accent, soft around the edges. Pretty." He said it matter-of-factly, not like a compliment designed to flatter, which somehow made it more affecting. They worked together in companionable silence, Marcus handling the heavier tasks while Sarah gathered her scattered belongings. When they'd secured everything that couldn't be left behind, he helped her onto his horse and swung up behind her. The intimacy of sitting in front of him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest against her back, made her acutely aware of how long it had been since she'd been close to anyone. "Hold on," he said quietly near her ear, and urged the gelding forward at a steady trot. The ride to his ranch took 20 minutes, and Sarah found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. Marcus pointed out landmarks, told her about the area's history, and made her laugh with a story about his first attempt at breaking a particularly stubborn Mustang. His voice rumbled pleasantly through his chest, and she could hear the smile in it even when she couldn't see his face. When they crested a small rise, his ranch spread out before them, and Sarah caught her breath. It wasn't enormous, but it was clearly prosperous and well-maintained. A sturdy house built from local stone sat at the center, surrounded by corrals, a barn, and several outbuildings. But what drew her eye immediately was the orchard behind the house, rows of trees heavy with fruit that glowed golden in the slanting sunlight. "Are those apple trees?" she asked in wonder. "They are. Took me 5 years to get them established out here. Everyone said I was crazy that the desert wouldn't support them. But I built an irrigation system from the creek, amended the soil, protected them from the worst of the summer heat. Now they produce better than half the orchards back east." There was pride in his voice, but also something deeper. Love, perhaps, the kind of devotion that came from nurturing something against all odds. "They're beautiful," Sarah said softly. Marcus brought the horse to a stop near the barn, and a young man emerged to take the reins. "This is Tommy Chen, works for me. Tommy, this is Miss Sullivan, the new school teacher. Her wagon broke down on the road." Tommy nodded politely, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "Welcome, Miss Sullivan. I will take care of your horse." "Thank you," Sarah said, accepting Marcus's hand as he helped her dismount. Inside the barn, Marcus hitched a sturdy wagon while Sarah looked around. Everything was organized, clean, well cared for. It spoke to the character of the man who owned it. She'd known plenty of men back in Missouri who couldn't be bothered to maintain their property or treat their animals well. Marcus Cooper clearly wasn't that type. "I'll need to ride back and bring your belongings here before we can transfer them," Marcus said. "Would you like to wait in the house? My housekeeper, Mrs. Martinez, can get you something to drink. Actually, if you don't mind, I'd love to walk through your orchard while I wait. I haven't seen apple trees since I left home." Something shifted in his expression, a warmth that made her heart skip. "Of course. Help yourself to any apples you'd like. They're Jonathan's, perfect for eating fresh." Sarah made her way through the neat rows of trees, marveling at how Marcus had created this pocket of green abundance in the middle of Arizona territory. The apples hung heavy on the branches, red and gold and perfectly ripe. She reached up to touch one, feeling its smooth skin still warm from the sun. "Go ahead," Marcus called from where he was finishing with the wagon. "Pick as many as you want." She plucked an apple and bit into it, and the flavor burst across her tongue, sweet and tart and crisp. It tasted like autumn back home, like her father's smile, like everything she'd lost and was trying to find again. To her horror, tears welled up in her eyes. Marcus appeared at her side so quickly and quietly that she startled. "What's wrong? Is the apple bad?" "No, it's perfect." "That's the problem." She laughed wetly, wiping at her eyes. "I'm sorry. I'm not usually so emotional. It's just been a very long few months." He pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket and offered it to her. You've lost someone recently. It wasn't a question. Sarah dabbed at her eyes and nodded. My father, 3 months ago, he was all I had left. My mother died when I was 12, and it was just the two of us for so long. When he passed, I couldn't stay in Missouri. Too many memories. Too many people looking at me with pity. So you became a school teacher and headed west. I was already a teacher, actually, at the girls' school in St. Louis, but I wanted a fresh start. Somewhere no one knew me as poor Sarah Sullivan, the orphan girl. She looked up at him, surprised by how easy it was to talk to this stranger. I probably sound ridiculous. You sound brave, Marcus said quietly. It takes courage to leave everything you know behind and start over. You sound like you speak from experience. I do. He gazed out across his orchard, his expression distant. I came here 7 years ago with nothing but a horse, some tools, and a dream of building something that would last, something that would matter. There were plenty of people who thought I was a fool, but you proved them wrong. I worked hard, got lucky a few times. Made friends with the right people. He looked back at her, and the intensity in his gray eyes made her breath catch. But I've never shown anyone my orchard who appreciated it quite the way you just did. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Sarah didn't dare name. Then Marcus cleared his throat and stepped back. I should go get your belongings before it gets dark. Make yourself at home. Pick as many apples as you'd like. He rode off before she could respond, leaving her standing among the trees with half-eaten apple in one hand and his handkerchief in the other, wondering what had just happened, and why her heart was racing. Sarah spent the next hour in the orchard, picking apples and placing them carefully in a basket she'd found near the barn. Mrs. Martinez, a kind woman in her 50s with gentle eyes and flour-dusted hands, had brought her the basket along with a jar of water and an invitation to dinner. Sarah had politely declined the dinner, knowing she needed to get to Ash Fork, but she couldn't resist the apples. When Marcus returned with her belongings loaded onto his horse, the sun was painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He found her standing on a wooden ladder he'd left propped against a tree, reaching for an especially perfect apple near the top. "Careful up there," he called, moving to steady the ladder. "I've climbed worse," she assured him, but she appreciated the solid grip of his hands on the wood. When she descended, he was closer than she'd expected, and she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Find some good ones," he asked. "The best I've ever tasted. Thank you for letting me pick them." "Sarah," he said, and the way he spoke her name sent warmth through her chest. "What if I told you that you could come back and pick apples whenever you wanted? What if I told you that I'd be happy to share my entire orchard with you?" She searched his face, trying to understand what he was really saying. "We only just met a few hours ago." "I know. And maybe I'm moving too fast, saying too much too soon. But I learned something when I was building this ranch from nothing. When you see something good, something real, you don't let it slip away. You hold on to it." "Marcus." She didn't know how to finish the sentence. "I'm not asking you for anything except the chance to see you again. To know you better. The teaching position in Ash Fork is yours, and the schoolhouse is right in town. But my ranch is only 2 miles away, and there's an orchard full of apples that taste better when they're shared." Sarah's practical mind told her to be cautious, to maintain proper distance, to remember that she'd come here to start a new life focused on teaching, not romance. But her heart, her grief-bruised heart that had felt nothing but pain for months, was suddenly beating with something that felt like hope. "I would like that," she said softly. "I would like that very much." The smile that broke across Marcus's face was like sunrise. "Then let's get you to Ash Fork and introduced to the school board. The sooner you're settled, the sooner you can come back and visit." They transferred her belongings to his wagon and set off toward town with the last light of day gilding the landscape. Marcus told her about Ash Fork, about the families whose children would be her students, about the shopkeepers and the sheriff and the doctor. He painted a picture of a community that was rough around the edges but fundamentally decent, a place where a woman could make a life if she was willing to work for it. The school board chairman is Douglas Williams. He runs the general store with his wife, Ruth. They have 4 children, all of whom will be in your class. They're good people, fair-minded. They'll appreciate that you made it here despite your troubles. You seem to know everyone. In a town this size, everyone knows everyone. It's both the best and worst thing about it. He glanced at her with a slight smile. By tomorrow afternoon, the entire town will know that Marcus Cooper brought in the new schoolteacher on his wagon. Will that be a problem for you? Not at all. Though I should warn you that half the unmarried women in the territory have tried to catch my attention over the past few years. I've resisted them all. When word gets out that I'm courting the schoolteacher, there might be some disappointment. Courting? Sarah felt her cheeks heat. Aren't we getting ahead of ourselves? Maybe, or maybe I just know what I want. He said it simply, without embarrassment or uncertainty. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and Sarah found herself stealing glances at his profile, at the strong line of his jaw and the way the last light caught in his dark hair. She'd never been the type to fall quickly, had always been practical and cautious about matters of the heart. But there was something about Marcus Cooper that bypassed all her carefully constructed defenses. Ash Fork appeared before them as the stars began to emerge, a scatter of buildings huddled around a main street. Oil lamps glowed in windows, and Sarah could hear piano music drifting from what was probably a saloon. It was smaller than she'd imagined, rougher, more isolated. For a moment, doubt crept in. What had she been thinking, coming all this way to a place so different from everything she knew? Then Marcus's hand covered hers where it rested on the wagon seat, warm and steady and reassuring. It's not much to look at, but it's home. And I think you're going to do well here, Sarah Sullivan. The general store was still open despite the late hour, and Douglas Williams emerged when they pulled up, a big man with a hearty voice and a welcoming smile. You must be Miss Sullivan. We were starting to worry. The wagon train came through this morning without you. I had some trouble on the road, Sarah explained. Mr. Cooper was kind enough to help me. Marcus is one of the good ones, Douglas said, shaking Marcus's hand. You're in good hands with him. Come inside, both of you. Ruth will want to meet you, Miss Sullivan, and we can show you the schoolhouse and your quarters. The next hour passed in a blur of introductions and practical arrangements. Ruth Williams was as warm as her husband, full of questions about Sarah's journey and her teaching experience. The schoolhouse was a simple wooden building at the edge of town, but it was sturdy and well-maintained, with proper desks and a small library of books. Sarah's living quarters were attached to the back, a single room with a bed, a stove, a table, and a chair. It was sparse but clean, and after months of sleeping in wagons and questionable hotels, it looked like luxury. Marcus helped her carry in her trunk and few boxes, arranging them neatly in the small space. When everything was settled, he lingered in the doorway, hat in his hands. You'll be all right here tonight, he asked. I'll be fine. Thank you, Marcus, for everything. You rescued me. You didn't need rescuing. You just needed a helping hand. He turned his hat in his fingers, suddenly seeming uncertain. The orchard, that offer still stands. Any time you want to visit, any time at all. How about Sunday afternoon? I should be settled in by then. His face lit up. Sunday afternoon, I'll be waiting. After he left, Sarah sat on her narrow bed and looked around at her new life. Everything was strange and uncertain, and she should have been frightened. Instead, she felt excited in a way she hadn't since before her father's death. And when she closed her eyes, she saw apple trees golden in the sunlight and a man with gray eyes who'd offered her more than just fruit from his orchard. The first week in Ash Fork passed in a whirlwind of activity. Sarah met her students, 15 children ranging from ages 6 to 14, each with their own personalities and challenges. There was Lucy Williams, Douglas and Ruth's oldest daughter, bright and eager and full of questions. Tommy Chen's younger sister May, quiet but wickedly intelligent. The Jackson twins, who could barely sit still for 5 minutes. And a dozen others, all looking at her with various combinations of curiosity, skepticism, and hope. Teaching had always come naturally to Sarah, but teaching in a one-room schoolhouse in Arizona Territory was different from her work at the girls' school in St. Louis. She had to manage multiple grade levels simultaneously, maintain discipline without crushing spirit, and earn the respect of students who were testing her at every turn. By Friday afternoon, she was exhausted but exhilarated. She was cleaning the blackboard when someone knocked on the schoolhouse door. Expecting a parent, she turned with her professional smile in place, only to find Marcus standing there with his hat in his hands and a bushel basket at his feet. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" "I remembered you mentioning you'd need to set up a home. Thought you might want some apples. They keep well and they're good for cooking or eating fresh." He looked almost shy, which was endearing on a man of his size and capability. Sarah laughed, delighted. "You brought me apples. And some preserves Mrs. Martinez made, and fresh eggs from our chickens, and possibly some beef jerky because I wasn't sure if you'd had time to stock proper provisions." He gestured to the basket, which was indeed overflowing with food. "That's incredibly thoughtful." She stepped aside to let him in. "Come in, please. You can help me figure out where to put everything in my very small kitchen." Marcus carried the basket into her living quarters, and Sarah was suddenly acutely aware of how intimate it was, having him in her private space. The room felt even smaller with him in it, his broad shoulders and tall frame making everything seem miniature. "It's cozy," he said diplomatically. "It's tiny, but it's mine and I'm grateful for it." She began unpacking the basket, exclaiming over each item, "Marcus, this is too much." "It's not enough. You've been working hard all week and you need proper food." He helped her arrange things on her small shelf. "How's the teaching going?" "It's wonderful and terrifying in equal measure. The children are testing me, of course. They want to see if I'm serious, if I'll stay, if I actually care. But I think we're starting to understand each other. They're lucky to have you." He said it with such sincerity that Sarah felt warmth bloom in her chest. "I don't know about that, but I'm certainly lucky to be here." She paused in her unpacking to look at him directly. "And lucky to have met you." The air between them seemed to thicken. Marcus took a step closer and Sarah found herself holding her breath. "About Sunday," he said quietly. "I've been thinking about it all week. So have I. Would you let me cook you dinner at the ranch? I'm a decent cook when I put my mind to it, and I'd like to show you more of the property. Maybe take you riding if you're interested." "I would love that." Sarah's heart was hammering. "What time should I come?" "Whenever you're ready." "Early afternoon. That would give us plenty of time before dark." "Early afternoon, then. Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself. That's all I need." After Marcus left, Sarah sat down heavily on her bed, one of his apples in her hand, and tried to process what was happening. In the space of a week, her entire world had shifted. She'd gone from grieving and alone to teaching in a frontier town and being courted by a rancher who brought her apples and looked at her like she was something precious. It was too fast, too much, too soon after her father's death. But it also felt exactly right in a way she couldn't explain and didn't want to question. Sunday dawned clear and beautiful. the autumn air crisp with the promise of cooler weather to come. Sarah dressed carefully in her best day dress, a soft blue cotton that brought out her eyes. She braided her hair and pinned it up, then took it down and braided it again, frustrated by her own nervousness. Marcus arrived at noon with his wagon and that warm smile that made her stomach flip. He'd clearly made an effort too, wearing a clean shirt and vest, his dark hair still damp from washing. "You look beautiful," he said simply, helping her up onto the wagon seat. "You look very handsome yourself." They rode out of town together, and Sarah felt the eyes of half of Ash Fork on them. Let them look, she thought with uncharacteristic boldness. Let them talk. She was tired of living her life according to what other people thought was proper or appropriate. The ride to the ranch was filled with easy conversation. Marcus told her about his week, about a difficult calving and a fence that needed mending and his ongoing battle with a coyote that kept trying to get into his chicken coop. Sarah told him about her students, about Lucy Williams's precocious questions, and the Jackson twins' latest prank. "They put a frog in my desk drawer," she said. "A very large, very angry frog." Marcus laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "What did you do?" I picked it up, walked outside, released it near the creek, and came back without saying a word. Then I continued teaching as if nothing had happened. The twins looked so disappointed that I hadn't screamed. "You're going to do just fine here." When they reached the ranch, Marcus helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist just a moment longer than necessary. "I thought we could go riding first, before it gets too hot. I want to show you the creek and the canyon beyond my property. It's beautiful this time of year." Sarah hadn't ridden in weeks, but the mare Marcus saddled for her was gentle and responsive. They rode out together across the high desert landscape, and Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. Out here, with the wide sky above and the land rolling away in every direction, she could breathe. She could be herself without the weight of grief and expectation crushing down on her. Marcus led her to a small canyon where a creek ran through cottonwood trees that were just starting to turn gold. It was an oasis in the desert, a secret pocket of green and water and shade. They dismounted and walked along the creek bank, their horses following behind like patient dogs. "This is my favorite place," Marcus said. "When I first came here and found this canyon, I knew I wanted to settle nearby. It reminded me that even in harsh country, there's beauty and life if you know where to look. It's perfect." Sarah bent down to trail her fingers in the cold water. "Thank you for sharing it with me. Sarah, I want to share everything with you." Marcus's voice was serious, and when she looked up, his gray eyes were intense. "I know it's only been a week. I know we barely know each other. But I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the moment you told me you were headed to Ash Fork to be a teacher. Since you cried over an apple in my orchard because it reminded you of home." Sarah stood slowly, her heart pounding. "Marcus, I'm not asking you to make any promises. I'm not rushing you, but I need you to know that this is real for me. What I'm feeling, it's real and it's serious, and I haven't felt anything like it before." "I feel it too," Sarah whispered, "and it terrifies me. My father died 3 months ago, Marcus. I'm supposed to be in mourning. I'm supposed to be focused on my teaching, on building a respectable life. I'm not supposed to be falling for a rancher I just met. Who made those rules? Who says grief has a timeline? Who says you can't build a life and fall in love at the same time?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I've spent 7 years building my ranch, proving I could make something of myself. I've got land and livestock and an orchard that shouldn't exist, but does, because I was too stubborn to quit. But none of it means anything if I don't have someone to share it with." "You're sharing it now," she pointed out, her voice shaky. "I want to share everything. The good days and the hard ones. The harvest and the planting. The sunrise and the sunset. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're beside me. I want to come home every evening to your smile. I want to build a life, Sarah. With you. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't tears of grief this time. That's a beautiful dream. It doesn't have to be a dream. It can be our future if you want it to. Sarah reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw, the solid reality of him. I do want it. I want it so much it scares me. But Marcus, we have to be sensible. We have to take time to really know each other. I have my teaching position and you have your ranch. We can't just rush into something because it feels right. Then we won't rush. We'll court properly the way respectable people do. I'll come to town to see you. You'll come to the ranch on Sundays. We'll go to church socials and town dances and all the proper events where people can see that my intentions are honorable. He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. But Sarah, don't ask me to pretend I don't know exactly what I want, because I do know. I want you. I want you too, she admitted, and saying it out loud felt like jumping off a cliff and discovering she could fly. Marcus pulled her into his arms then, and Sarah went willingly, pressing her face against his chest and feeling his heartbeat strong and steady under her cheek. They stood there by the creek, holding each other while the cottonwood leaves whispered overhead and the water sang over the rocks. It felt like coming home to a place she'd never been, like finding something she hadn't known she was looking for. When they finally pulled apart, Marcus kept hold of her hand. Come on. I promised you dinner and I'm going to prove that I'm not just a rancher. I can actually cook. Back at the ranch house, Marcus set about preparing dinner while Sarah watched from a chair at his kitchen table. He moved with the same quiet competence he brought to everything, chopping vegetables and seasoning meat and checking the bread rising in a bowl near the stove. Where did you learn to cook? Sarah asked. From my mother, before she passed, and then from necessity when I was on my own. A man can only eat burned beans for so long before he either learns to cook properly or dies of stubbornness. I'm glad you chose to learn. Sarah stood and moved to help him. Let me do something. I can't just sit here watching you work. They cooked together, falling into an easy rhythm as if they'd been doing this for years instead of hours. Marcus told her about growing up in Colorado, about his parents' small farm and his father's death in a mining accident, and his mother's slow decline after. About deciding to head south to Arizona Territory, where land was still available, and opportunities existed for men willing to work hard enough. Sarah told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her mother's death from consumption, and her father's devotion to giving her the best education he could manage. About how she'd become a teacher because her father believed women deserved opportunities beyond marriage and motherhood, even though he'd have loved grandchildren. He would have liked you, Sarah said softly. He admired men who built things, who created something lasting. I wish I could have met him to ask his permission to court his daughter properly. He would have said yes. After interrogating you thoroughly and making absolutely certain your intentions were honorable. She smiled at the memory, bittersweet. He was protective, as he should have been. You're worth protecting. They ate dinner at Marcus's sturdy wooden table and the food was actually delicious. The man could cook, which impressed Sarah more than she wanted to admit. After dinner, they walked out to the orchard in the cooling evening air. The apple trees were dark shapes against the purple sky, and the first stars were appearing overhead. I have something I want to ask you, Marcus said, stopping in the middle of the orchard. And I want you to think about it seriously before you answer. Sarah's heart leaped into her throat. Surely he wasn't going to propose already. That would be insane. Wonderful, but insane. The harvest is coming up in a few weeks. All these apples need to be picked and sorted and either sold or preserved. It's a big job, and usually I hire extra hands to help. But this year, I was thinking about doing something different. What's that? I want to invite your students and their families to come help with the harvest. The children could learn about farming and orchards. The families could take home a share of the apples. And I'd pay them fairly for their work, of course. But mostly, I want the community to see this place, to know what's possible out here if you're willing to work for it. He paused, taking her hands. And I want them to know that this orchard, this place, it's going to be part of your life. That we're building something together. Sarah's eyes filled with tears again. Marcus Cooper, that's the most wonderful idea I've ever heard. So you'll help me organize it. You'll bring your students. I'll help with everything. It will be an education in science and agriculture and economics all at once. The school board will love it. She squeezed his hands. But Marcus, I think I should tell you something. The reason I'm crying all the time around you isn't because I'm sad. No. It's because for 3 months, I've felt nothing but grief and exhaustion and worry. And then I met you, and suddenly I'm feeling everything again. Joy and hope and excitement and this terrifying, wonderful feeling that maybe my life isn't over. Maybe it's just beginning. Marcus pulled her close and kissed her forehead, tender and sweet. It is just beginning, Sarah, for both of us. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity and growing anticipation. Sarah threw herself into teaching with renewed energy, preparing her students for the orchard harvest and watching them get excited about the prospect of a day at Marcus Cooper's ranch. The entire town seemed to catch the fever, with families volunteering to help and Marcus coming into town twice a week to coordinate with Sarah and the school board. Every time he visited, he brought something. Fresh eggs, more apples. A beautiful piece of fabric Ruth Williams helped him pick out at the general store. A book of poetry he thought Sarah might enjoy. He was courting her openly and thoroughly, and Sarah found herself looking forward to his visits with an intensity that would have embarrassed her if she'd cared what anyone thought. They stole moments alone when they could, walking together after church on Sundays, sitting together at the town social, where Marcus proved to be a surprisingly good dancer, sharing quiet conversations on Sarah's small porch after he'd brought her home from dinner at the ranch. He was patient and respectful, never pushing her for more than she was ready to give, but making it clear with every word and gesture that his intentions were serious and permanent. "People are starting to take bets on when you'll propose," Sarah told him one evening as they sat watching the sunset from her porch. "Are they now? What are the odds?" Most people say before Christmas. A few optimists say before Thanksgiving. Mrs. Martinez apparently told Ruth Williams it would be before Halloween. Mrs. Martinez is a wise woman. Marcus's eyes twinkled. "Marcus," Sarah swatted his arm, laughing, "you cannot possibly be thinking about proposing so soon." "Why not? I know what I want. You know what you want. Why should we wait just because some arbitrary social convention says we haven't known each other long enough? Because people will talk. Because it will seem improper. Because I'm supposed to be in mourning." Even as she said the words, they felt hollow. "Your father's been gone 3 months, Sarah. You've mourned him. You'll carry him in your heart forever, but he wouldn't want you to stop living. Would he?" Sarah thought about her father, about his fierce love and his constant encouragement for her to grab life with both hands and live fully. "No, he'd tell me not to be a fool. He'd tell me that good men are rare and when you find one, you hold on tight. Then that's settled." Marcus took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I'm not proposing tonight. Mrs. Martinez would be disappointed if I proved her wrong. But Sarah, know that I'm going to, soon. And when I do, I hope you'll say yes. "I hope I will too," she whispered, and Marcus laughed, pulling her close and kissing the top of her head. The day of the harvest dawned perfect and clear, with just enough coolness in the air to make outdoor work pleasant. Families began arriving at Marcus's ranch by mid-morning, wagons full of children and picnic baskets and excitement. Sarah rode out early with Douglas and Ruth Williams and their brood, helping Marcus and Mrs. Martinez set up stations and organize the workers. Marcus had planned everything meticulously. He'd brought in extra ladders and baskets. He'd marked which trees were ready for picking and which needed more time. He'd set up tables for sorting the apples by quality. And he'd arranged for a huge outdoor lunch that would feed everyone who came to help. Watching him work, directing people with patience and good humor, making sure the children stayed safe while still allowing them to feel useful, Sarah felt her heart swell with love. This was the man she was going to marry. This good, generous, hard-working man who'd taken a chance on building an orchard in the desert and was now sharing it with an entire community. "He's a good one," Ruth Williams said, coming to stand beside Sarah. "You're lucky." "I know, though I keep waiting for something to go wrong. It all seems too good to be true." "Sometimes things are just good, Sarah. Sometimes we get lucky and meet the right person at the right time. Stop waiting for disaster and just enjoy your happiness." The harvest lasted all day, with breaks for lunch and water and rest in the shade. The children worked hard, proud to be treated like adults with real jobs. The adults laughed and joked and helped each other reach the high branches. And through it all, Marcus moved among his trees that shouldn't exist but did, sharing their bounty with open hands. Late in the afternoon, when most of the work was done and people were packing up their wagons with apples to take home, Marcus found Sarah standing alone among the trees, looking up at the branches now lighter from their harvest. "Tired?" he asked. "Happy," she corrected. "This was wonderful, Marcus. Thank you for including everyone. Thank you for helping make it happen. You know, when I planted these trees, I had a vision of what they'd become, but I never imagined this. All these people, all this community, all this life." He took her hand, his expression serious. "I never imagined you, Marcus. I know I said I wouldn't propose tonight, but Sarah, I can't wait any longer. I've been carrying this around all day, and if I don't ask you now, I'm going to burst." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond, delicate and beautiful. Sarah's breath caught. "I built this ranch from nothing," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "I built this orchard against all odds. But none of it matters if I can't share it with you. Sarah Sullivan, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life showing you how much I love you? Will you help me turn this ranch into a home and this orchard into a legacy?" Tears streamed down Sarah's face, but she was smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. "Yes, yes, Marcus, I'll marry you. I love you so much." He slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, kissing her properly for the first time. It was sweet and passionate and full of promise, and Sarah felt like she was finally, truly home. Around them, the orchard seemed to glow in the golden afternoon light, and from the direction of the house, they could hear cheering. Apparently their private moment hadn't been as private as they'd thought. But Sarah didn't care. Let the whole territory know. She was marrying Marcus Cooper, and she'd never been happier in her life. The wedding took place 6 weeks later on a Sunday afternoon in late October, right there in the orchard with the whole town of Ash Fork in attendance. The apple trees had lost most of their leaves by then, but the bare branches were beautiful in their simplicity, and someone had strung lanterns through them that glowed as the sun set. Sarah wore a cream-colored dress that Ruth Williams had helped her sew, simple but elegant, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Marcus wore a new suit that Tommy Chen's sister May had tailored for him, and he looked so handsome that Sarah's breath caught when she saw him standing under the largest apple tree, waiting for her. Reverend Thomas from the church in town performed the ceremony, his voice carrying clearly in the cool autumn air. Sarah's hand trembled in Marcus's as they spoke their vows, promising to love and honor and cherish each other for as long as they both lived. When Marcus slipped the wedding band onto her finger next to her engagement ring, Sarah felt a sense of rightness settle over her like a blessing. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Thomas said with a smile, and Marcus didn't need to be told twice. He pulled Sarah close and kissed her thoroughly, to the cheers and applause of everyone gathered. The celebration lasted long into the evening, with food and music and dancing. Douglas Williams played the fiddle while his oldest son accompanied him on guitar. Couples danced on the hard-packed earth between the barn and the house, and children ran wild in the gathering darkness, drunk on cake and excitement. Sarah danced with Marcus under the lantern-lit trees, his arms strong around her, his eyes never leaving her face. "Happy, Mrs. Cooper," he murmured. "Happier than I ever imagined possible, Mr. Cooper. Wait until tonight. I have plans to make you even happier." Sarah blushed, but she was grinning. "Is that so?" "That is absolutely so." They turned the small room that had been Marcus's office into a proper bedroom, with a new bed and beautiful quilts that Mrs. Martinez had made as a wedding gift. When the party finally ended and the last guests departed, Marcus swept Sarah up into his arms and carried her across the threshold of their home. "I know it's traditional to carry the bride over the threshold," he said, setting her down gently in the bedroom. "But I also just really wanted to hold you. You can hold me any time you want now. I'm your wife." "My wife," Marcus repeated, wonder in his voice. "Sarah Cooper. My wife." He kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, with an intensity that made Sarah's knees weak. They had all the time in the world now. No more stolen moments on porches or carefully chaperoned visits. They belonged to each other completely. Later, lying in Marcus's arms in the darkness, Sarah traced patterns on his chest and marveled at how her life had transformed. 4 months ago, she'd been alone and grieving, heading west with no idea what she'd find. And now she was married to a wonderful man, living on a beautiful ranch, with a job she loved and a community that had welcomed her. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked, his hand gentle in her hair. "I'm thinking about the first day we met, when you stopped to help me on the road. What would have happened if you'd ridden past? If you'd been in a hurry or assumed I could handle it myself? I don't think that was ever a possibility. I saw you sitting on that wagon, so determined and brave and beautiful, and something in my chest just knew, this is her, this is the woman I've been waiting for." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I would have stopped. I had to stop." "Well, I'm very glad you did. Because asking to pick a few apples from your tree turned into the best decision I ever made." "You can pick apples from these trees for the rest of your life," Marcus promised. "This orchard is yours now. Everything I have is yours, including my heart, which has been yours since the moment you cried over a Jonathan apple and let me see your grief." Sarah turned in his arms to face him. "And everything I have is yours. My heart, my future, my love. All of it, Marcus. Always." They made love again, slower this time, learning each other's bodies and hearts in the darkness. And when Sarah finally drifted off to sleep, safe and warm in her husband's arms, she dreamed of apple trees and children's laughter and a future full of love. The first winter as Mrs. Cooper was an adjustment. Sarah continued teaching, riding into town 3 times a week while Marcus handled the ranch work. It wasn't traditional for married women to keep working, but Marcus had encouraged it, saying her students needed her, and she loved it too much to give it up. The school board had been hesitant at first, but Sarah's dedication and skill had won them over. The rest of the week, she helped Marcus with the ranch. She learned to care for the chickens and collect eggs. She helped Mrs. Martinez with the enormous task of preserving the apple harvest, learning to make cider and apple butter and dried apple rings. She rode out with Marcus to check on the cattle, learning the boundaries of their land and the names of their neighbors. It was hard work, harder than anything she'd done in St. Louis. But it was also deeply satisfying. She was building something real, something that would last. And she was doing it with a man who loved her completely and treated her as an equal partner in all things. Christmas came, and they hosted a gathering for Sarah's students and their families. Marcus carved a beautiful wooden rocking horse for Lucy Williams and made jump ropes for the other girls. Sarah helped him choose knives and tools for the older boys. They served hot cider from the orchard and cookies Mrs. Martinez had spent days baking. "This is what I wanted," Marcus told Sarah as they watched the children play in the snow that had fallen the night before. "This sense of family and community. This feeling that our home is a place of welcome and joy. We're going to have children of our own someday," Sarah said softly. "Running through this snow, playing in the orchard, growing up loved and secure." Marcus pulled her close, his hand resting on her flat stomach. "I hope so. I hope we're blessed with as many children as you want, sons and daughters who have your intelligence and kindness, and your strength and generosity." Spring came early that year, and with it, good news. Sarah was pregnant, due in early autumn. Marcus was beside himself with joy, immediately becoming overprotective and trying to prevent her from doing any work at all. "Marcus, I'm pregnant, not dying," Sarah protested when he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time while still living their lives. But you're not just any woman. You're my woman, and I'm not taking any chances." Despite his hovering, it was a good pregnancy. Sarah felt healthy and strong, even as her belly grew round. She taught through the spring term, finally retiring from the schoolhouse in June, when the summer break began, and her condition made the ride to town uncomfortable. The school board had already hired a replacement for the fall, a young man fresh from a teaching college in California. Sarah felt a pang at giving up her work, but she also knew her priorities had shifted. Being a mother was going to be her most important job now. She spent the summer preparing the nursery in one of the empty bedrooms, sewing tiny clothes and knitting blankets, while Marcus built a beautiful cradle from cherry, what he'd traded for. They argued playfully about names, both hoping for a healthy baby regardless of gender. In September, when the apples were ripening on the trees once more, Sarah went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Marcus looked terrified, holding her hand and wiping her forehead while the midwife worked. But finally, just as the sun was rising over the orchard, their son was born, crying lustily and perfect in every way. "A boy," Marcus breathed, tears streaming down his face as he held his son for the first time. "Sarah, we have a son. What should we name him?" Sarah asked, exhausted but happy, watching her husband cradle their baby with infinite gentleness. "I was thinking about your father. What was his name?" Samuel Stevens." "Then let's call our son Samuel Marcus Cooper. Samuel for your father who raised such an incredible woman. Marcus so he knows he's mine, and Cooper because he's ours." Baby Samuel was an easy baby, thank goodness, sleeping well and nursing eagerly. Marcus proved to be a devoted father, walking the floors with Samuel at night when he fussed, singing him cowboy songs in his deep voice, showing him the orchard and the animals even though he was far too young to understand. The second harvest celebration was even bigger than the first, with baby Samuel bundled up and watching the proceedings from his mother's arms. People came from all over the territory, having heard about Marcus Cooper's impossible orchard and his generous spirit. They picked apples and shared stories and celebrated the abundance that hard work and faith could create. "This is our legacy," Marcus told Sarah as they stood together under the oldest apple tree, their son sleeping peacefully between them. Not just the orchard or the ranch, but this sense of community, this idea that success is better when shared. "Our son is going to grow up knowing how to be generous," Sarah agreed. "He's going to grow up with apple trees and open skies, and the knowledge that his parents loved each other deeply and completely." The years passed, sweet and full. Samuel grew from a baby into a toddler and then a young boy, running through the orchard and helping his father with the ranch work. Sarah gave birth to twin daughters when Samuel was 3, Rose and Ruth, named for the wild roses that bloomed in the canyon, and for Ruth Williams, who had become Sarah's dearest friend. The orchard expanded as Marcus grafted new varieties and planted additional rows. The ranch prospered, with cattle and horses and a growing reputation for quality. Sarah went back to teaching part-time when the twins started school, working with students who needed extra help in reading and mathematics. Their home became known throughout the territory as a place of hospitality and warmth. Traveling preachers knew they could find a meal and a bed. Families in need knew Marcus and Sarah Cooper would help without judgment. And every autumn, the harvest celebration grew larger, drawing people from as far away as Flagstaff and Prescott. When Samuel was 10 and the twins were 7, Sarah gave birth to another son, James, who had his father's gray eyes and his mother's quick mind. And 2 years after that, a final daughter, Grace, who would be their last child and their greatest surprise. 5 children, Marcus marveled one evening, looking around the dinner table at their loud, messy, beautiful family. "When I was alone in that orchard 7 years ago, I never dreamed I'd be so blessed." "Neither did I," Sarah admitted. "I was heading to Ash Fork expecting a quiet life as a spinster teacher. Instead, I got you and this ranch and all these amazing children and more love than I knew existed in the world." Samuel, now a young man of 17 and his father's right hand on the ranch, raised his glass of cider. "To Mother and Father, who built something beautiful out of nothing." "To the orchard," Rose added, always the romantic. "To family," Ruth chimed in, practical like her namesake. Little James and Grace echoed the toasts, not fully understanding but happy to participate, and Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. These moments, these ordinary, extraordinary moments around the dinner table with her family, were what life was really about. That night, lying in bed with Marcus, Sarah thought about the passage of time. They were in their 40s now, their children ranging from young adults to small children. Their bodies bore the marks of hard work and childbearing. Marcus's hair was shot through with silver, and Sarah had laugh lines around her eyes. But when Marcus looked at her, she still saw the same love and desire that had been there the first day they met. And when she looked at him, she still felt her heart skip. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked, pulling her close. "How I asked to pick a few apples from your tree and you gave me the orchard and your heart." "Best deal I ever made," Marcus said with a smile. "Though I think I got the better end of it." "We both did," Sarah corrected. "We both got exactly what we needed, exactly when we needed it." She kissed him then, sweet and deep, tasting the coffee he'd drunk with dinner and the promise of many more years together. They'd built something lasting, something beautiful. Not just the orchard or the ranch or even their family, though those were all precious. They'd built a love that had weathered seasons and challenges and the ordinary difficulties of life. They'd built a partnership based on respect and trust and genuine affection. And every autumn, when the apples ripened on the trees that shouldn't exist but did, Sarah remembered that first day. Broken wagon wheel, dusty trail, and a rancher who'd stopped to help. Who'd brought her to his orchard and let her pick as many apples as she wanted. Who'd seen her grief and her strength and fallen in love with both. The years continued to pass, bringing the changes that time always brings. Samuel married Lucy Williams, surprising no one, and they built a house on the far edge of Marcus and Sarah's property. The twins both became teachers, Rose in Ash Fork and Ruth traveling to Flagstaff where she met and married a lawyer. James showed early promise as a veterinarian, apprenticing with the doctor in town and dreaming of formal training back east. And Grace, their youngest, had her father's gift with growing things, spending hours in the orchard learning every aspect of its care. Marcus and Sarah grew older gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. They became grandparents and then great-grandparents, their family spreading across Arizona territory like the branches of their beloved apple trees. The orchard continued to thrive under Grace's eventual management, becoming known throughout the region for its exceptional fruit. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Marcus and Sarah stood together in the orchard where they'd been married, surrounded by 3 generations of family. The trees were heavy with fruit, just as they'd been on that first day when Sarah had asked to pick a few apples and Marcus had offered her everything. 30 years, Sarah marveled, her hand in Marcus's weathered one. It's gone so fast. And yet every day has been a gift, Marcus replied. Every morning I wake up next to you. Every evening I come home to you. Every moment in between, knowing you're mine and I'm yours. Their children and grandchildren gathered around them, presenting them with gifts and sharing memories, and celebrating the love that had created this vast, beautiful family. Samuel spoke about learning to work the ranch alongside his father. The twins remembered their mother teaching them to read. James told stories about Marcus's terrible jokes and Sarah's patient wisdom. Grace, now a young woman herself, talked about inheriting her parents' passion for the orchard and their commitment to community. As the sun set over the orchard, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, Sarah leaned into Marcus's embrace and felt complete contentment. They'd lived a good life. They'd worked hard and loved harder. They'd built something that would last long after they were gone. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Sarah asked. "When I was crying over an apple, I said you were brave. You said I spoke from experience about starting over, about building something that would matter." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with love. "You built something that matters, Marcus Cooper. This orchard, this family, this legacy of generosity and hard work and love. You built something extraordinary." "We built it," Marcus corrected, tilting her face up to his. "Together, Sarah. Everything we've accomplished, we did as partners. You were the missing piece I didn't even know I needed." He kissed her there in the orchard, surrounded by their family and the trees they'd nurtured for 3 decades, and Sarah felt the same flutter in her heart that she'd felt on their wedding day. Some things never changed. Some loves only grew stronger with time. Marcus and Sarah Cooper lived well into their 80s, blessed with good health and sharp minds until the very end. They remained active in their community, mentoring young couples and sharing their wisdom freely. The orchard continued to flourish under Grace's care, expanded by her children and grandchildren, who inherited the Cooper gift for coaxing life from the harsh Arizona soil. When Marcus finally passed in his sleep at 84, Sarah was beside him, holding his hand just as she had for more than 50 years. It was peaceful, the end of a life well lived. At his funeral, the entire territory seemed to turn out, testifying to the impact one generous rancher had made on countless lives. Sarah lived another 3 years, staying sharp and engaged until the end. She spent her final years surrounded by family, telling stories about the old days and offering advice to anyone who asked. She never stopped visiting the orchard, walking slowly among the trees and remembering. On a crisp autumn morning, with apples hanging heavy on the branches, and the sky that brilliant blue that only exists in high desert country, Sarah's heart simply stopped. Grace found her sitting under the oldest apple tree, the one where she and Marcus had been married, a peaceful smile on her face. They buried her next to Marcus in the small cemetery near the ranch house, under a pair of apple trees that Grace had planted specifically for that purpose. The entire family gathered, multiple generations strong, to say goodbye and celebrate a love story that had become legendary. Years later, Grace's great-granddaughter would bring her own children to the orchard and tell them the story of Sarah and Marcus. How Sarah had arrived in Arizona territory with nothing but grief and courage. How Marcus had stopped to help a stranger on the road and found his soulmate. How Sarah had asked to pick apples from his tree, and Marcus had given her the orchard and his heart. The story became part of the family mythology, passed down through generations. Young couples in the family would stand under those same apple trees to exchange their wedding vows, hoping some of Sarah and Marcus's love would bless their own marriages. Children would climb the gnarled old trunks and pick fruit from branches that had been producing for over a century, never knowing they were part of a living legacy. The orchard itself became a historic landmark, recognized for being one of the oldest continuously operated orchards in Arizona. Tourists would come to pick apples and hear the story of the rancher who defied conventional wisdom to plant fruit trees in the desert, and the teacher who became his wife and helped him build something extraordinary. But beyond the historical significance and the family legend, what really mattered was this. Two people had found each other when they needed each other most. They'd built a life based on love and hard work and generosity. They'd raised children who carried those values forward. And they'd created a legacy that extended far beyond acres and apple trees. In the end, Sarah's question and Marcus's answer had been about more than fruit. It had been about recognizing something precious and choosing to embrace it fully. About taking a chance on love even when it seemed too fast, too soon, too impossible. About trusting that sometimes the best things in life come when you're brave enough to ask for what you need and generous enough to give more than what's required. The orchard still stands today, its trees bearing fruit season after season, its soil enriched by over a century of care. And on autumn afternoons when the light slants golden through the branches, you can almost feel the presence of Sarah and Marcus Cooper, still walking among their trees, still holding hands, still deeply and eternally in love. Their story reminds us that love can bloom in the harshest environments if tended with care. That generosity returns to us multiplied. That the best legacies are built not of stone or steel but of love and family and community. That sometimes all it takes is one person stopping to help, one moment of kindness, one offer freely given to change the entire trajectory of a life. Sarah asked to pick apples from Marcus's tree. He gave her the orchard and his heart. And together, they built something that would last forever, planted as firmly in Arizona soil as the trees that had brought them together, growing stronger and more beautiful with each passing season, bearing fruit that would nourish generations yet to come.